I'd like to formally introduce Liv Mendelsohn. Liv is the Executive Director of the newly founded Canadian Centre for Caregiving Excellence. Over the course of her career, Liv has founded and helmed several organizations in the disability and caregiving space, including the Wagner Green Centre for Accessibility and Inclusion at the Miles Nadal JCC, which she led for 7 years, and then as well the ReelAbilities Toronto Film Festival, where she served as the founding artistic director. Liv, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really looking forward to understanding how, how we start to knit together all these different communities of caregivers and how we can start to affect some sort of systemic change that we can start better supporting our caregivers to help them be more resilient in their work that they do. So Liv, I'll pass it over to you.
Thanks so much. And a big thank you to the team at Brain Injury Canada who have really focused on the needs of caregivers in addition to and together with the whole family system of care. You are wonderful partners and do such great work. I'm just going to share my screen, as I said, so bear with me for just a moment as I get that queued up to share. So the Canadian Centre for Caregiving Excellence, as you mentioned, is newly founded. We launched in March. We are an arm of and powered by the Azrieli Foundation, which is a large philanthropic foundation in Canada that has been focused on the needs of people with disabilities and their families and caregivers for many, many years. So we are disability informed and rooted in a disability rights framework, but we're actually focused on caregiving across the lifespan, from young carers, sibling caregivers, parent caregivers, spouse caregivers, and from acute periods of care to lifelong periods of care. And we're focused on the whole field. So caregivers, care providers who are people like PSWs, disability support workers, and of course, the people who access care. And we are building on a good amount of work that's been done with some great provincial agencies working around the needs of caregivers, and a really robust advisory committee that includes people with lived experience. I myself am a caregiver. I'm right there in the trenches with those of you who are watching this. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we know right now, a little bit about how our organization fits in, and how we are trying to mobilize a movement for change. So not everybody identifies with the term caregiver. I know I often think of myself more as a mother than a caregiver. But if you're providing care, you're one of 7.8 million Canadians who are doing so and providing an average of 19 hours a week of care. And if you're caring for someone who has medically complex needs, that can be up to 70 hours per week. And one of the things that we know about that time that's spent is it's not all spent on direct care. A lot of it is spent on navigating the systems, filling out forms, scheduling appointments, rescheduling appointments, and again, some of those systems we were just talking about that don't speak to each other, being that hub and that organizer. And that's often a part or even full-time job for families. There's a huge economic cost to unpaid care. And we also know that families, and this won't surprise those of you listening, experience loss of income, loss of employment, or changes to their employment, and often burnout, which we just discussed. And caregiving really at its heart is about a relationship. So we want to reorient the healthcare system and our policymaking machinery to that relationship. Also tell you a little bit about what we know about care providers. They work in a variety of settings, including individual homes, group homes, supported apartments, independent living housing, long-term care, and more. They're a largely racialized and newcomer and largely female workforce with few protections, unclear pathways to advancement, and uneven training and certification. And there's a really high turnover. And right now, many families will know firsthand that there's about a 25% shortage across Canada of care providers. So often if you're trying to make sure you have your care team and your schedule set for the next month or two, at least in advance, it's simply not possible. There's not enough people out there. We also know that one worker can work as a PSW in the morning, Maybe they're working a shift in the evening as a DSW and a home care shift on the weekend, for example. So we're not, people are not making ends meet with one gig, and they're working in a variety of settings with a variety of different agencies and different families. And it makes for a very, very complex work life. So our center was founded after a good couple of years of scoping with this vision, a Canada leading the way in quality care, where caregiving is valued, caregivers are supported, and people accessing care are central to policies and practices. And our mission is to support and empower caregivers and care providers, advance the knowledge and capacity of the caregiving field, and advocate for effective and visionary social policy with a disability-informed approach. So it's a broad mandate, and you're going to hear a little bit about where we're going with that and how you can get involved in this work. Our values, excellence, interdependence, the notion that none of us is fully independent, none of us is an island. We all depend on each other for care, for support, and we depend on our society and our societal infrastructure for care and support. Equity and inclusion, building networks, co-design, and advocacy. So on the question of resilience, which really is one of the topics that brings us here today, we've been talking to caregivers for the last 6 months. We've talked to hundreds of caregivers, and we've held 6 national focus groups. And these are some of the kinds of things that we've heard. There is no support for me. There are therapies and supports for my brother, but no one ever asks me how I am doing and what I need. I'm burning out. I've had to build my own network and to try to focus on self-care when I can, but I am exhausted. Why do we have a system that requires me to be so resilient? Why are we okay with a broken system that puts all the work onto families? And I think these are really important questions. I think we need to both look at self-care and some of the things that David just spoke about, some of the ways of giving yourself space internally, but also on wellness supports and system navigation. In addition to self-care, we need to be caring for caregivers and advocacy for better policy and government supports. And we're going to talk about both of these things together. So we have 4 areas of focus: education and leadership development, support networks and knowledge sharing, inclusion and underserved communities, and advocacy and policy development. Which is what I'm going to speak about the most today, but I'll give you a little sense of what we're up to. So we are working going to be working with our friends at Inclusion Canada and the National Leadership Consortium on Developmental Disabilities to launch a new leadership institute to better support and train and build leadership in the developmental services sector across the country. We know that about 70% of the heads of those agencies are going to be retiring in the next 10 years, and we want to make sure that we have the capacity and the leadership to lead that sector and to support those families into the future. We're also working to support a project called Caregiver Center Care, and it's a program that helps your family doctor, your GP, understand how to better support caregivers and to understand their role. Because one of the things we've heard from caregivers so much is that, nobody asks me how I'm doing. So how do we build in care for the caregiver into our medical system? Support networks and knowledge sharing. We have launched a new organization called Siblings Canada that supports specifically, pardon me, sibling caregivers. We know that over time, with the demographic shifts that we're about to have, especially in the area of lifelong disability, primary support caregivers are more and more often going to be siblings. So we want to make sure that siblings are armed with the supports, the knowledge, and everything they need to best support their sibling and to make sure that their sibling has a meaningful life and a full life, and that they also can have a full and meaningful life. I'm going to speak more about this, but this is a group that I hope everyone on this call will be excited to hear about and to get involved in. There was a group called Caregivers for Change that was working out of McMaster University, and we have adopted that group and relaunched it as the Caregivers Advocacy Network. We have caregivers from coast to coast to coast, thousands of caregivers across the country who are going to help us build this movement, seeking change through policy. And we'll talk more about that in a moment. And we're also working on wellness supports. We're working with folks at CAMH on providing online mindfulness, ACT therapy, and other supports. Right now, it's being offered for care providers in Ontario. We are looking to expand those offerings and offer them free of charge to caregivers and care providers across the country. So that's an ongoing project for us. Inclusion and underserved communities very close to our hearts, making sure that whether you're a caregiver in Toronto or Lethbridge or Iqaluit, you have access to supports and services that you need. So we are doing a first ever caregiving mapping and needs assessment in Nunavut, traveling to every community in Nunavut over the next 3 years with our friends at Nunavumi Disabilities Makinasquetet Society. And we're working with our partners at L'Appui Quebec to support caregiver organizations outside of Quebec in developing Francophone services and to create a network of Francophone caregiver and care providers services in Nova Scotia, Manitoba, Ontario, and New Brunswick. And here's the piece that I think leads best into what we were talking about in the segue with David. We need real change and government action on change. And how do we do that? Well, one of the first things that we're doing is we are launching our first white paper that will speak about some of the challenges of these siloed systems and present some possible policy solutions. We are going to arm our caregivers through the Caregivers for Change network to be involved in advocacy, to know how to speak to their local legislators and to tell their stories and get involved in really pushing for change. We're also working with Statistics Canada on what kind of data we want them to be collecting because we need more good data. And we've been meeting with members of parliament from all the parties and senators to start to create a caregivers caucus, a caucus of legislators from every party and every place in Canada who care deeply about caregiving. They may not always agree on the solutions, but they agree that caregiving is an important issue and that we really need to better invest in the health and well-being of our caregivers, especially with all of the demographic changes that are just around the corner. We're going to spend a lot of next year talking about caregiving every chance we get, leading up to a care summit and then to a national caregiver strategy. So there's an opportunity for everyone to be involved in this work, to get involved in collective action. I think when David spoke to taking action, when you feel paralyzed and exhausted, do we want to put more work on already exhausted caregivers? No, but this kind of work can be really energizing. Being able to tell your story, being able to show where the cracks are in the systems, and not just cracks, but chasms are in the different systems, and to advocate for real change can be energizing and can help feel and be part of solution making. I've posted our link there. You can get to it through our website at Canadian Caregiving, and it's the Caregivers Canadian Advisory Network. But we are building strong numbers and knitting people together from the worlds of disabilities, the world of aging, medical conditions, all of the different ways and kinds of caregiving that we have, and all of the different people who are doing caregiving across the country. We want everyone's voice. And we want to be able to show that, you know, this is 1 in 4 Canadians and that number is only growing. And it's not a sustainable system to have people giving so much time without any financial supports, without help navigating these very complex systems. We need help for caregivers, we need support for caregivers, and we need caregivers involved in policy change. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to open it up for questions. I know we had one question earlier about the public health system and caregivers. And so I'm going to speak to that. And if people have more questions, you can put them in. We really are excited to have this conversation with you. People go into healthcare to be helpful, to help people, to care for people, to provide medical care. But right now, the caregiver role isn't always recognized, and the needs of caregivers aren't always built into those systems. So this isn't the failure of individuals. This is a failure of systems to ask, how can we support caregivers? What does the caregiver need? So if you're bringing in someone you're caring for to a medical appointment, at what point does that medical professional ask you how you're doing, and who tracks that? Because we know we need systems of care to be strong in order for people who are accessing care to thrive. And when caregivers aren't getting what they need, what we need, then the people who need that care aren't getting what they need either. So it's about finding ways to build in both to our various medical systems and also to our policy systems, our systems of support, ways to help caregivers. I'm seeing another question. Brain injury caregivers are often left aside in favor of other caregivers, including folks who support dementia and Alzheimer's. How do we ensure all are priorities and all prioritized and all have a voice? I think that's been a real downside of having all of these silos. Because what we have is almost a divide and conquer system where folks advocating for cancer support are advocating for that. Folks advocating around Alzheimer's are advocating for that. Folks advocating for developmental services are advocating for that. And actually, we're all stronger together. The needs and the particularities may be different, but the overall policy needs that caregivers have, like financial supports, like better systems navigation, are common to all of us. And so our role is to help knit those groups together and to ensure that everyone's needs are met. But it really is about finding those common pieces so that we can all speak with one voice and all have a voice. And our advisory council has people from the worlds of disability and aging and mental health, all sorts of different areas of healthcare that are often further subdivided. We want to hear from everyone, and we want all kinds of caregivers to let us know what we're missing and to help us fill those gaps and to be involved. So thank you for that question. I hope that is helpful. I think it also speaks to some of our funding models that may need to be changed as well, so that we're not slicing and dicing people, but that we're looking at what the larger needs are. Are there other questions? Let's see. Oh, I'm seeing another one. Where does the increased need for respite support fit into your work? The wait times are long, ridiculous, it says here. Absolutely, the need for respite is real. The need for funding for respite is real, and increased funding. So as an organization, we're not a direct service provider, but we are a funder. And we are looking at some projects that will increase opportunities for respite. But again, we think that this is an area of government responsibility. So we're here to fill gaps, but we're also here to ask government to be involved in solution making with us and with caregivers around the country. And we know even before COVID, but particularly during and after COVID, the burnout is real. It's not about burnout prevention. We're there. It's very difficult to prevent when we don't have the resources that we need. So we are eager to partner with policymakers to look at the question of respite and to make sure that people have the support they need to be able to continue to provide the amazing care they're providing to loved ones. Because the alternatives are quite grim for both caregivers and people accessing care and for our system as a whole. So thank you for that question. Let's see. Are there any other questions? I see people typing. Thank you. I'll just speak to one more that I want to note. Brain injury does often not fit into standard boxes that exist because the needs around brain injury can be acute, they can be episodic, they can be long-term. So it's important to get involved in advocacy so that your story and your situation is better understood. And I know that Brain Injury Canada has been very involved in that work as well. So I'm going to stop there. I want to thank them for inviting me and thank you for the great questions. And I hope you'll all join with us in the advocacy network and get involved. We need to hear from you so that we can do this together, and we can make sure that we're hearing all the voices we need to hear from coast to coast to coast and from all sorts of different communities and different caregivers.
Thank you so much, Liv. That was wonderful. And absolutely, we'll get that link out to everyone. And once we have the recordings out as well, make sure that link is easily available for people to know that there is a way to reach out and to be part of an to advocate and be a part of that movement to get more supports and have your voices heard. So we really do thank you, Liv, for bringing in this piece for us. And thank you for joining us today.